first round of introductions, and we don't want to leave you out. So, where name, where you're from, which can be what discipline you're from, what city, what country, and then what's your relationship to fossil fuels. I'm gonna start with you, Kevin, because you're close.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fourth year undergraduate student in political science. Fifth year now. I was born in North Dakota in Minot, but I've lived in Vancouver my whole life. I just go back and forth. My family's business and those things.
I've never known how to pronounce it. Minot.
Minot. And my relationship with fossil fuels. We own a plot of land up towards Regina, and it actually they found oil underneath it, so we sold it to a rig company. And so it's pretty interesting.
That's actually quite rare. In the U.S., has anybody ever even heard of the Beverly Hillbillies? The TV show, the Clampetts, are farmers, and then they discover up through the ground comes a bubbling crude. People of my generation can sing the whole song. And they get rich and they move to Beverly Hills, which on fire. Now, for a while. But it was a much more common thing in the U.S. that subsurface mineral rights are owned by a private landowner, which seems to be the case with you in most of Canada. Most of Canada is still is claimed by the state as crown land or publicly owned land. It is contested by many First Nations, of course. But because of that, the subsurface mineral rights, the oil and gas and coal under the ground are owned by the state rather than by individuals. And even when land was sold in most places, so I'm intrigued like how this even happened. In most cases, when the state alienated, sold its land or gave its land away to private landholders, they said, you can have the top, but anything underneath is still ours. So you're like a unicorn in the class in that respect as well. Cool. Pat.
Yeah, so my name is Kyle. I'm a fourth year political science student. I'm from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, so very, very north. And so I guess my relationship with fossil fuels is I think Yellowknife primarily uses hydroelectricity. We have a dam up there, but we also use diesel generators as well, if to supplement it and stuff. My parents actually built our house in 2008, and right around that time, the city had just approved new environmental regulations. And so we won some kind of award or something for being the greenest house in the city or something. Because our house is heated by wood pellets. So I guess that's it's a renewable resource, I guess, but it does, fossil fuels. But now in I think 2017 or something, my dad installed solar panels on our house. So now in the summer when we get 24-hour daylight, we have a $20 electricity bill because it's just the fees.
Yeah, but you have to pay for the hookup,
exactly.
To have an account, you pay that much.
Exactly,
whether
yeah.
You said you're not.
And so, but we produce, because it's 24-hour daylight, we produce so much electricity that by the time the winter comes, we kind of get credit. So even though we're still using some electricity, our electricity bill is reduced a lot because we've overproduced. So the house is kind of at a almost net zero basically, which is kind of cool.
Very cool. It's they call it net metering in the U.S. I don't know if that's what it's called. It depends by Canadian province. Where if you produce extra, you sell it back to the system, and then you get credits that you.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. thought like anyone up there, we have to use like cars and stuff, but I think the cool thing about,
And probably bigger cars,
yeah,
like more four-wheel drive.
yeah, you definitely want four-wheel drive in the snow. But there's also the fact that Yellowknife is a very small city. There's only 20,000 people. It's like about the size of Pitt Meadows, I think. And so you can, it's like 20 minutes to drive around like the loop of the city. So you don't really go that far, so you're not really burning a lot of gas. And so if you had like, I think my mom just got like a hybrid car in the past couple of years. Because all electric wouldn't work in the winter because the battery would probably die at -40. But hybrid works really well because she can charge it at night and you're only going a couple kilometers in a day. And so even though the battery is reduced, she's not really using a lot of gas. So, but that's like a special case. Most people use gas, but I would say considerably less gas than Vancouverites or people from Ontario and stuff like that.
That's, like, most recent master's graduate is now the climate officers, just started, I think, this month, as like a climate officer for the city of Yellowknife.
Oh, nice.
And one of the questions when I was doing a reference is like, she's from the prairies in Saskatchewan. She can handle the cold.
Yeah.
That was like, really, she's lived in cold places, it'll be good. But one of the challenges when I'm on the advisory panel of a think tank called the Canadian Climate Institute, and we're always doing projects or advising on Canadian climate policy, and we talk about sort of all the normal cases, and then there's remote places in the north as like these special challenges where people are off the grid, they need to rely on diesel generators, or it's really, really cold, and so something like a heat pump is, you know,
It doesn't really
the
work.
new heat pumps work quite well, but -40, probably not so much.
Yeah.
So it's actually really exciting to hear, like, you know, the kind of the flip side. It's really far north, but like the, you know, solar,
Yeah. And
24-hour solar.
exactly, yeah. And that's definitely like more Yellowknife. If you go to like some of the more remote places, like Yellowknife still has like a road connection to the rest of Canada. But yeah, the remote, like Inuvik, Iqaluit, those are very remote and definitely use a lot more like, diesel generators and things like that.
And more flying, like
Yes.
stuff is flown in.
For
It's
sure,
just
yeah. Flight is a
food
big,
and other goods are
big
flown in,
issue.
which is much more carbon intensive
For sure.
than transporting them by rail or
yeah.
long distance trucking and so on. The other interesting thought I had, well, I think it's interesting, while you were talking, is we have this myth in Canada because there are long distances between many communities and long, like, whole drive, that people need to drive more and that they need to rely more on fossil fuels. And this came out when British Columbia first adopted a carbon tax in 2008, and there was this huge pushback from the north, and then it kind of spread to everything beyond the lower mainland, and mayors of smaller cities and towns were arguing this is unfair to us, but in fact, when you get the data, people drive less and their homes are better insulated, so they use less gas to keep their homes warm. So they were not the ones paying most in carbon taxes. It was people in suburban Vancouver who are commuting long distances by cars and live in badly insulated homes. So there are these kind of myths about how hard it is to decarbonize in the north and how necessarily fossil fuel intensive lifestyles are. And people also drive less. You live in a smaller place, you know, you drive around in a smaller city most of the time. Most people are not driving city to city regularly. Cool. Thank you all, and thank you all for sharing so many thoughtful reflections. Fire. Let's talk about fire. Boy, it's a little too on the nose today than I would hope. And that's got me thinking of where the Fort McMurray Beast fits in the history of big climate change exacerbated wildfires that we have seen. Slave Lake, 2011, and I think you missed in earlier chapter some of the background. There are these two firefighters that arrived, I think they're father and son from Slave Lake. It's because when they first started hearing about it, they knew what was coming, and they like got in there. They weren't asked, they just got in their pumper truck and drove north. Fort McMurray, Kelowna wildfires, so there've been different ones at different times. I think big recent one, I'm not sure I've got some of these in order. Lots of wildfires. Wildfires a common thing in California. When I lived in California, you'd be driving along the highway and see fire just here and there in the field. It really freaked me out. All the other soccer moms were pretty calm about it. But the campfire, the Paradise Fire, there's been a few really big ones. I think one of them was in the sort of Santa Rosa area, large number of homes lost. The campfire, even bigger impact. Lahaina, whole city of Lahaina on Maui, gone. Jasper, very emotional one for a lot of Canadians, even if they're not from Alberta, and now Los Angeles. And this one will get lots of attention, maybe for a little longer, because movie stars' houses are being burned down. You're starting to see those. So let's talk about fire. We're gonna go in a little loop. We're gonna start on the opposite side with you, Katerina, this time, and we're gonna go in this direction. What jumped out at you? What are the impressions that you were left with in the readings for today from Fire Weather?
I didn't have access to the Canvas page until this morning.
Because you just signed up, or because it didn't go live?
It didn't go live.
Ah,
So I can see some of this.
because I like, when I go in and student view, and it shows me, like when I say, like I could go in, I would click as a student, and I could see it. And so I thought only people who enrolled at the very last minute. Oh man, Kelly, were you able to see it?
No, until like 4 hours ago, I saw that it's just published.
Oh man, this is such a drag. Was anybody able to do the reading? Okay.
I didn't know the bus.
Yeah, you.
Not fully though, because I was kind of reading through my access got, because the online access only has 2 available.
Yeah, because there are also
And I'm
limits
reading
to
my
how much of a
copy.
book that they can do. We're gonna read more of this book anyway, so you still need to read it, and I would still, like, it's a page turner.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it feels like you're, reading a novel, and it's got all these, he's talking about these individual characters and stuff. So let's have a real short conversation among those of us who have read it, and, hopefully that will spur you all to get a hold of the book and read it. I have a sample. We don't read the whole book, but we read probably about half of it, all told. So we're gonna start with you, Adam. What jumped out at you reading however much you were able to?
So I read the whole book back in the summer, but I didn't know.
I didn't expect you to reread it.
Yeah, but I didn't know until this morning which chapters we have to read. So I haven't done the reading, but I've done the
You
reading.
haven't done the reading.
And so what struck me about the book was, and not knowing directly the chapter,
Yeah,
right, but just the comparisons he draws between humanity and fire, and our ability to spread and grow, and then almost consume ourselves, because fire does burn itself out and disappear. It's a little chilling, but he doesn't go too hard on that, because there's a lot of, and obviously it's plenty of doom and gloom. It's about a city burning down, but he also presents the perspective that, okay, it's not just because people are bad that we're here, that almost despite all of the exploitation and oppression that has been involved, a lot of where we have arrived is in pursuit of a better life, and we're just sort of being shown the contradictions that perhaps did not seem so obvious at the start, although what kind of was a bit of a truth bomb in my brain was when I talked about climate science and the atmospheric science and the science of carbon dioxide and how the heat absorbing properties of greenhouse gases were first observed and predicted in the 1850s. And because you hear about the environmental movement in the 60s, and then things grow from there, and then there's a consensus around the 90s being, okay, I believe this, but also this seems like it's rather new and in vogue, and so that makes all of these claims of, not necessarily denial, but of obfuscation. It gives them a little more credence than perhaps you'd like, and you go, oh, well, this section is something that's been observed since the 1850s in Europe, in the Alps. Oh boy, okay, this is something that has been predicted. And there's even, at one point in the book, there's an advert from an oil company in the 50s saying our oil, our products have enough impact to melt this glacier. They're actually bragging about it. So it was before it was seen as a negative, or whether it was before it was fully understood and before it was seen as kind of a dirty secret that needed to be covered up. It was this idea kind of in vogue that we're able to bend Earth to our will. Yeah. Also about Slave Lake and Fort Mac and then Fort Nelson. One of my superiors at my base called her Torch because she's been at all three sites where the towns have almost burned down, or much of them have burned down.
Not the hat trick you want to have.
Not the hat trick you want to have, although Fort Nelson didn't burn down, so we're good. We only lost 2 structures, but it was very interesting to hear from this person that I've worked with about getting to see 3 cataclysms in your lifetime.
I should have said, because you guys haven't had a chance to start the book, it is about the 2016 fire that burned, I don't know if it was a very large fraction of the city of Fort McMurray was burned to the ground. Fort McMurray being the city in the middle of Canada's oil sands production. It is a city that revolves around oil production that was then essentially wiped out. And it's, from the perspective of, give some historical background that Adam was sharing with us. It's got some pictures in there that are kind of, there's like, we'll come back to one that I always think of me, really creep me out. But it's also really about what it was like for the people. It's telling the story of the people who were in the city when it burned. Anything in the chapters you went through that jumped out at you?
For me, so I'm not a really big nonfiction reader, but I love fiction books. And for me, one thing I noticed was he kind of frames fire as like the enemy, as this like predator almost. So it's like this personification, I would say. So that for me was interesting because we often just view climate change as this like, just like climate change, and we just see these things that happen as natural disasters. But there's almost like he gives like a sentient personality to it, which makes it really like creepy, like what you were saying.
They called it the beast.
Yeah,
This was the term.
Yeah, and it's kind of just like, it's the beast that's hunting on the people or hunting on this landscape. But then he also addresses how like that's related to like slow action from the mayor, from the community, and that sort of stuff. And then I think that he also makes a lot of connections to like how that's related to a global level. Like, the people or not people, like the leaders of Fort McMurray kind of were slow to act. So are people at global level. So he makes a lot of connections, I noticed, to that like the parallels and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As a firefighter, Adam, Viance kind of making the fire into an actor, like giving it, kind of humanizing it. Do firefighters think of the fire as like a creature?
I don't know. Not yes,
Maybe not so
no.
much.
I don't think there's. How is it? No, I mean, think of it kind of like a force, like water or anything, but not really in the same way. I found it never made me put down the book, but I found sometimes it was a little over dramatized. But it's entertaining. It's fun to read. So maybe not to the extent that Vaillant does it, although he still managed to deliver a really good book. It's not, an eye roller, but there's a level of respect. I don't know in the same way that he really personifies it that we personify it, but that can go from crew to crew,
That's good.
person to person.
Good to have the benefit of that experience.
And I knew it was dramatic,
Yeah.
because I liked it. And I was like, I know that other people who are gonna read this are gonna be like, this guy's just off topic or something.
I mean, it's written like, it feels like you're reading a movie script
Kind
when
Yeah.
you're reading it, but it is true. Yeah,
I haven't done the reading.
but
because
chime in, please.
But just talking about the over-dramatization, I guess, my dad was he's a now retired firefighter, but he was a firefighter for 30 years. And he never described it as a beast. I think it was more just like kind of a force, like what Adam said, like something to kind of like sort of respect and like kind of try and control, but there was never any personification.
Yeah, so it's a dramatic license there.
of. Do people feel like fire is gendered? Like, I know sometimes people with gender specific things. Like, you know how people like
Hurricanes historically have been female.
Yeah, like that.
This is male.
Yeah, no, so I don't know, or like the sea, or I don't know. People gender that sort of stuff, like the moon and the sun. So I don't know, like if anybody feels like fire is gendered as well.
Yeah, Christine.
I thought the same in the Philippines. I live right beside the smallest active volcano in the world. So it's a volcano within a volcano in a lake or something like that. And it spewed like 2 years ago. So lava and everything, but it's kind of same thing with fire. We call it like a girl because women kind of power through everything in the Philippines. So it's kind of the same thought where we're like, woman. It's like a mother to us, but it's also kind of like we kind of take it as a blessing because we don't have wildfires. It's more volcanoes and lava. So kind of, I guess, not the same feeling, but semi the same feeling.
I mean, there's a long tradition in many cultures of Mother Earth, sort of gendering nature and Earth that had very gendered implications sort of early. The emergence of modern science was, Sir Francis Bacon talked about scientist's job was to tame nature and make her your slave. That was, controlling nature had a gendered aspect to it. And because, Mother Earth, the natural systems are often seen as female, we often have like volcanoes as female, hurricanes as female, but the fire, I think he describes it as male. Does he?
Because I feel like
I don't know.
when you use terms like beast and hunter, just like traditionally, that's kind of what I was thinking. So.
Oh, because we often describe, like, if you don't, a generic animal,
Yeah.
people tend to assume it's male. They use male pronouns for, like, a dog, you don't know what it is, and so, yeah, interesting observations. Victoria,
Similar.
in your bus read.
In my bus read, very
Might have
rough.
been thrown up.
Rough bus read, but similar to what was already said, I thought what was really interesting was like how long the evacuation took, and then the parallel that was drawn was like the time and space element. It's too far away temporally, and it's too far away spatially. So we're gonna wait like to the last minute, and it was like the description of like families driving literally through the fire was kind of like
It's
how
harrowing.
how do you wait that long kind of thing. So similar to like climate change in general, it's like how have we waited so long. And the other part that stood out to me was basically describing how older like furnishings wouldn't have went up in flames as fast, but then talking about basically like how everything inside the homes was also made of petroleum products, and kind of very relevant to like what the plastics like negotiations and so on like recently kind of thing. Like plastics are everywhere and they're so tied up with oil and gas. And then the other thing I really wrote down just off my memory, I thought there was like an image in one of the chapters, and it was basically like people, and they're like, it's like a matchbox, and they're like, this is a great place for homes kind of thing. So like just describing like how even where the community was like built in like the more affluent like parts were more susceptible to fire because they're like beautiful kind of thing.
Well, in LA right now, places, once the fire gets into the trees and the canyons, spreading to some of those more affluent places. Yeah, there's a couple passages where Wyatt talks about a study that was done, setting a room with traditional furnishings, wood and cotton stuffing in the chairs and stuff, and then a modern home, and how much, like, there's kind of, they set a fire with a candle on the couch in both of them. And up to the 3-minute mark, it's the same, and then suddenly the one bursts into flames, and everything starts burning. Something that doesn't happen in the other one for like 20 minutes or something like that, because the synthetic fabrics burn, the stuffing burns, basically everything is flammable in modern houses. And this fire, it comes from the forests. But one of the interesting things is there's like the forest firefighters, the wildfire fighters, and then there's the city firefighters, who, most of whom have never actually fought a fire up to this point. And it's a very different kind of fire and a very different fire service that wasn't ready for it, because it's just jumping from and it's not just the furnishings, this being Fort McMurray, people, it's a pretty well-to-do town. People have all the toys in their garages. Everybody's got gas barbecues with gas tanks, everybody's got ATVs and boats and multiple vehicles in the garage, and it describes the houses exploding. And I read something or heard it on TV last night about in LA, you could hear the gas tanks popping all up and down the street as people's barbecue gas takes off.
I didn't get a chance to do the reading either, but I do remember because I lived in just south of Calgary in 2015, 2016. So I was there when this was all happening, and I remember hearing about it. And I think it was like one of the first major wildfires that I can recall actively learning about. And it also I remember there was this clip on the internet that was going around from the Fort McMurray fire of a security camera inside someone's home, and there was like a living room, and there was like a fish tank or whatever, and the fire was like outside, and it slowly broke the glass, because it was like a sliding glass door, and it broke the glass, and then it the whole house burned. It didn't explode, but it was like a slow, yeah, it would just kind of that. And also, yeah, it's just the wildfires that they're just they keep, it's just especially today, talking about this fire with LA going on, and last year with the Kelowna fires, which I was actually in Kelowna when that happened, just visiting though, but I have an aunt in Kelowna. And then at the same week that the Kelowna fires were happening, there was massive fires around Yellowknife too, which was the whole 70% of the entire territory was evacuated that month.
Was it Yellowknife, the whole city of Yellowknife that was evacuated, or was it a different city?
Yes, Yellowknife was all evacuated. Luckily, Yellowknife never burnt. There was no structural damage in Yellowknife, but there were other small communities that completely burned.
We were evacuating a city.
Yeah.
Really far north. This is not normal wildfire territory.
And not just Yellowknife, but 70% of the entire territory. Yellowknife only comprises of 45 to 50% of the population, but 70% of the population was evacuated. So it just kind of all these images of fires. It's also really interesting that they talk about it in the book, I would assume, but just the way people describe LA fires or Yellowknife fires or Kelowna fires, they all describe it the exact same way, about how people lost their homes and whatever. So it's I don't know. I feel at some point it's almost going to become what's the word that I'm looking for? Desensitized, I guess.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're just so massive that I don't know.
Wow. In the book, because we've always had fire.
Yeah.
wildfires, California wildfires are a normal thing. Australia's having a bad bushfire, they call it, bushfire season, but they have gotten way worse. And the destruction has been much greater. And maybe it's only subtle in comparison to the dramatization of the beast and so on in Lyon's book, but he connects the dots between development of fossil fuel production and a fossil fuel economy where fossil fuels work by burning. They produce energy through fire. And so that how central fire is to that, but then that those fossil fuels are causing climate change. That is that he's sort of circling back and causing wildfires, of worsening fires that at the limit are threatening the very community that was producing the oil. So he kind of does this loop there. And I'm gonna come back to both of you, Tim, then Adam. I don't recall, because I only reread the parts that I assigned for today, how much he goes into it. So I'll just say a bit about this, that it's not, climate change itself doesn't cause the fires. Although, we're seeing that more. What it is, it's a threat multiplier. So wildfire is a natural phenomenon, but in warmer temperatures, the forests are drier and are more like, they're more like tinder. Or rainfall and drought. The rain falls more heavily in certain periods of time, and we've got drought in other periods of time. That's apparently been a factor in the conflagrations in LA right now, because they had fairly heavy rain at a point in the summer where they've got where they had, extra growth of foliage, and then a 6-month drought. So there's a lot more timber, dry kindling than there usually is. And then they've got warmer than usual temperatures, that increases the winds, that increases the spread of the fires. So climate change is a factor in worsening these fires. Tim, then Adam, and then.
Yes. Yeah, backtrack a little, if that's okay.
Please.
I haven't read the book yet, so I might be fully off, but I wonder if, the personification of fire really is an over-dramatization. I looked into the concept of two-eyed seeing a little bit this past summer.
Of what?
Two-eyed seeing, which is looking at things from, both an indigenous and Western ways of knowing kind of perspective. And so in many indigenous cultures, they see what most of us see as non-living, as living, things like air, or water, or fire. So I wonder, perhaps, is that closer to the kind of reality and gravity of the situation, personifying fire, that we could perhaps take that more seriously if we could see that as a living thing? I don't know.
Yeah, or if it's at this scale.
Right.
Whether people are more inclined. Is it just his, dramatic license to, keep it turn it into a page turner, or was there something unique about this one? Yeah.
Bion does this in a very Hollywood manner, but I think, like you say, Tim, there's something valuable to be taken from seeing fire as a natural and necessary part of a living, breathing ecosystem. That's what it is. That's how indigenous peoples have known about the forest, and it's how Western science is coming around to know about the forest. When I've worked with indigenous groups, because there are all indigenous groups, we've done a smudge before going on to our work week, and we do view it as kind of a spiritual undertaking to be tending to the fire and tending to the woods. So I think there is some value to seeing fire as animate to a certain extent. I think that we're all drawn to Bayon's book because he does all this Hollywood type stuff, and it's quite engaging and entertaining, but we're maybe not so sure about how we take this into our everyday lives, because we don't, this isn't maybe the register in which we want to think about things, but I think Tim bringing up two-eyed seeing is very valuable.
Some of my takeaways for the book, and I'm going to try to see if these resonate with some of you. How many people, did anyone see the movie Don't Look Up? Came out? Okay. A few of you. One of the things that these little vignettes that stayed with me from these particular chapters are about human resistance to seeing what's happening. Now, he's choosing to write it that way, but it is also, it seems pretty factual. Like there are these moments where one of the head fire honchos, I think he's the forest guy, is on the radio at 12. He's on the local radio being interviewed live, and he's like, there's nothing to worry about, everything's fine. And then they're looking out the window and they can see, they're talking about how the color of the smoke changes as a fire gets worse. And as they're talking in this radio interview, the color of the smoke is changing, and he starts to actually visibly sweat. But he still said, everything's okay, everything's okay. There's a story of a woman, she's driving from the, I think she worked with St. Crude, Suncor, I can't remember, one of the S1's big companies. The production is maybe 30 kilometers out of town. She's driving into town for a meeting, and she sees, the sky has turned black, and she's thinking this meeting isn't gonna happen. So what does she do? She drops off her dry cleaning. And the guy at the dry cleaner is on the phone with his wife saying, get everything ready, we're gonna evacuate. And then he takes her dry cleaning and says, Tuesday okay? And they have this perfectly everyday, normal interaction, as if there's, as if there's a fire at the edge of their city already, that's already crossed the river at this point. There's a guy, the last ones who got out of the first neighborhood that burned. There's this description, and Vian's talked to these people how they're packing up their stuff. They realize they need to evacuate, and the guy's trying to keep his wife calm. It's not working, never does. And he's telling her to calm down. She's going, the fire, and finally she screams, the fire is on our street, and he turns around and it's jumping from house to house towards them on the street. So there was kind of this, we have to stay calm and act normal, even as the fire is coming at them. And they were, he says, the last people out. Did you ever hand up, Adam?
Oh, yeah, something that we get taught at fire, and obviously it's very hard for our brains to deal with, and being in political science, seeing world events, wars, famines, pandemics, where you go, this can't be real, this can't be happening. And as you grow older, you see a lot more of them. You go, what? I wasn't expecting that. You don't want to believe that something's happening. So what they teach us, they say, things that have never happened, happen every day. So like, remind yourself that what you prepared yourself for and what you expect might be totally blown out of the water. And in this case, even the professionals were not open to the idea that they might have to get up and run from everything. They were used to managing a fire, but they didn't maybe have it in their mind that they would have to come and run.
Yeah.
And in the case of Fort Nelson, what happened, and this isn't in the news, it's not a secret, but it's not something that's published and hasn't been published, is that the guy, there's 4 officers who were at the base there, and one of them's been there for 30 years, and he saw the weather, and he knew how things were, and it was early May, and it was way too dry for early May. And this is weird. There's no other fires in the province right now. Let's request all the resources we can and just have them stationed here because they're working anyways. Let's have them work in our area because a lot of crews are bounced around the province. I'm on a type of crew that's attached to a certain zone. So they got a fire camp in, which is essentially, it's a mini city. And so they had 100 or 200 firefighters waiting because they were sure something weird was going to happen, or if something happened, they wouldn't be able to catch it. And so they caught it. And what it was is there's 80 to 120 kilometer-hour winds that knocked down the power line, started a fire, which blew it into town. So that was a case where somebody went, you know what, I've seen this before, or I feel like something is wrong. And I know the guy, he's at Newfie, he goes home to Newfoundland every winter. But in the summer, he's in Fort Nelson. But whatever it is, whether it's like, even Joe Biden said they weren't going to have a Saigon moment in a couple, and then they did, and nobody thought that Putin would invade Ukraine, and then he did, and then the pandemic was just going to be a break from school, and then it wasn't, it's not because, wow, politicians are so screwed up they can't read the writing on the wall. I think it's just how we are as people. And it's pretty hard to get out of that things will be okay, we'll figure it out. You know, I think they thought the First World War would be over by Christmas. All these things is that it seems to just be whatever event it is, so, or math, or what have you, things that never happen.
I mean, what Zion's doing in this book is drawing an analogy. It's not subtle. I mean, between, because he's doing it in Fort McMurray, he's talking about climate change. That this sort of, the denial, the failure to recognize the threat that was bearing down on this community, how widespread that was, and ultimately how dangerous that was. Luckily, no one died, which is astounding. The whole city of, I don't know, 80 or 100,000 people was evacuated. Huge numbers of buildings were destroyed. No one died, but they lost their homes. Hundreds of families. So the sort of, it's about that tendency to denial. Anyone who's seen Don't Look Up want to give us a quick summary of what the premise of the movie is? Yeah.
It was like, the movie's basically like an analogy between climate change and a giant meteor strike heading straight for Earth that will kill literally everyone on the planet. And there's these two, I guess, scientists or people, I can't remember their exact, I think one's like a scientist, and they're trying to like warn people to going on like television, and they're like, so we know this, we know for sure, 100% that this asteroid is coming straight for Earth and it will kill absolutely everyone. We need to develop a way to like stop the asteroid. And then these like news anchors are kind of like, right, so about like, you know, but that's might cost a lot of money. Is there like another solution? That seems a bit extreme, blah, blah, blah. So it's like,
This is morning TV, let's keep it light.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like almost, there was an actual news clip about someone talking about climate change, like in real life, that almost like parallels the movie, like exactly. It's kind of freaky, but you know, the movie was, I think
British guy, there was a British clip of a scientist on being interviewed, and like,
yeah,
I remember
so
that.
it's like a very, very similar clip, but yeah, the movie's basically about trying to warn the planet that this climate or this asteroid is coming to kill everyone, and government officials and, you know, the public is kind of like, yeah, but that might cost a lot of money. Like, we'll see. But what if the asteroid can provide jobs and things like that? Like, they're just, and it's like, no, it's going to kill everyone.
Some areas and makes it better.
Exactly, yeah.
What about the movie?
Yeah, it also shows like how people cope with distress differently as well. Some people kind of just like completely give up and turn to just like partying and stuff, and then there's people who like turn to their families. And then it shows there's like ultra rich people who are thinking of ways to like buy spaceships and get out of Earth and things like that. So I think it also just shows the different capabilities that people have on how.
It showed how quickly things went from complete denial, we're fine, to, oh my God, we're all gonna die, let's party. And there's sort of, you're gonna die anyway, let's die on the dance floor or with our families. It kind of, we're at risk of this moment. We've gone really quickly from denying the severity of climate change in some quarters to those saying, look, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So I want to turn to that question, the other question that I asked you, which probably everybody can chime in on even if you haven't done the readings, and that's how are climate change and a looming wildfire the same, and how are they different? Let's start with the same part. Were you able to see the questions even beforehand? No. You couldn't see anything.
I really know them too, so I saw them, but I'm like, yeah, little class.
Well, anyway, you've read in the news, you've heard about wildfires. They're happening right now. How is it similar or different than climate change there in Victoria?
Like there's less denial about wildfires because it's something that you see kind of thing, and so, like climate change you see the impacts, but it's not like this big thing in your face kind of thing, so less denial, I think.
Less denial, although kind of a remarkable level of it still.
Yeah.
It just, it's visible. And so at a certain point, there's this moment where everyone in Fort McMurray looks up and sees that the sky has gone black behind the town. And then it's like, oh, I think this thing is real. And, you know, we don't seem to have reached that point in climate change. Other similarities or differences?
One similarity is that they affect everybody just on various levels. For example, a wildfire will burn every house. It doesn't matter which house it is, but people living in it, some people may be able to cope with that easier based on their financial and their just status. But some people may not. It might really just really end their entire career or life or something. And same with climate change. To some people, it can be like the end of everything. And to some, it's just an obstacle in their daily lives.
I went to New Orleans maybe a decade ago, and it was still many years since Hurricane Katrina, the one that flooded New Orleans. So it was many years after Hurricane Katrina. You could still see there were parts of town, the wealthy parts of town, where sort of heritage homes looked like nothing had happened. They had been completely rebuilt. There were parts of town, sort of middle class parts of town, where the damaged homes were ripped down and new homes were built. And then there were parts of town where there were either vacant lots or sort of yellow tape, like for abandoned buildings. And they all flooded. Some people were able to, draw on insurance or private resources, and other people lost everything. Fort McMurray, probably lots of insurance. Climate change, a global phenomenon. There's people with next to nothing who do not have the resources to cope. Other similarities or differences? Yeah, John.
I'm kind of thinking about that sense of, oh, it won't happen to me, if you don't have any familial connection to, say, with a wildfire, or like you weren't in Yellowknife or in Fort Mac or something. But then thinking about, as climate change and the effects of climate change become more intensified, and same with wildfires, how long is that really going to be a feeling people have as the effects of both climate change and wildfires become more widespread?
And that's a huge question for me, because the evidence of the impacts of climate change, including worsening wildfires, but also flooding, heat death, it's all around us. And yet people seem to just shrug it off. And when I do media interviews, I don't know how many times I've been asked, is this the wake-up call? And I've started saying, I don't know whether there will be, is there a wake-up call short of your own house burning down? Or your family member dying from extreme heat? I don't know what it's gonna take. Yeah, hi.
I'll say it's interesting that you said that about Yellowknife, because for me, when Yellowknife was being evacuated, my area of town was evacuated first, I guess, and then they evacuated the rest of the city. But part of my because I was also in Kelowna at the same time. It was the same week. So Kelowna was also being evacuated. My aunt lives in Kelowna, and my city was being evacuated. So mentally, I just had to preserve almost my sanity. I had to be no, there's no way Yellowknife is gonna burn down. Even though logically I knew it was a very real possibility, but mentally I had to just be no, that's not possible. I can't go into that mindset, or else I'm gonna go crazy. So I had to just be there's no way they're gonna, there's no way the government's gonna let the only major city, the only city in the Northwest Territories burn to the ground, because that's such a valuable asset for both government interest and whatever, and economics for mining and stuff in the north, and just definitely the mindset of it can't happen to me, even though I know it could, but just I couldn't.
Even when your hometown being evacuated.
Exactly. Even when it's being evacuated, I had to just keep the idea of it's going to be okay. It has to be okay. And luckily it was for me and for the whole city of Yellowknife, but that's obviously not the case for other parts of the territory. But but yeah, it's definitely a coping mechanism. Even though, you know, I was very much interested in climate change in high school. Like, I organized like climate strikes and stuff like that. So I was very aware of like the possibility. And Yellowknife had experiences with fires before. Like in 2014, they were really, really bad. The whole city was like covered in like raining ash and lightning. It was very apocalyptic. But definitely, yeah, definitely coping mechanism.
Go Katarina, then Justin.
I think like in terms of wildfires and climate change, I feel like a lot of like if you're external to the actual like I guess line of fire, it's easy to like forget about it and deny it because you're not really like feeling the actual like repercussions and the negative consequences of like what's actually going on. And I think a lot of that is also like the case with like climate change. Like a lot of like people in the US don't see the effects of climate change like rising sea levels or just things like that. So it's easy for them to like not consider that aspect and until it actually affects them. I think like a lot of like if you're external to the whole problem, like the hurricanes in Florida were like really severe this year. So I think it's easy to forget about them if you're living in like a place like Vancouver because you're not feeling the consequences or like feeling the effects of like what actually happens. And with a lot of like news and different kinds of news and media and like different kinds of politics like going around and wars or like threats of wars, it's easy to like lose sight of the problem of climate change and to kind of just like, because there's so much already going on, to like forget about what might actually be happening or the consequences of it.
I mean, I think there's a bunch of aspects to that. I think absolutely. Partly it's that it's not me that's affecting somewhere else. Partly it's people anchor in the present. You know, this is where I am, this is my place now. And that's a huge challenge with climate change because people compare everything, you know, a carbon tax, you know, some policy that's proposed that might increase the price of gasoline a little bit, to what they're paying now. And they're thinking like, I'm doing okay now, or I'm struggling to pay my bills now, so I'd rather not have that. And what they don't think is that now isn't an option anymore. That this is all gonna keep getting worse until we get to net zero. Like, it's gonna keep getting worse until we eliminate net emissions, till we stop adding more fossil fuel emissions to the air. And people don't, that's not human nature to think, you know, that far into the future. We compare everything to how I am now. And I'm okay. I'm safe. It's awful that bad things happen to other people. But right now I'm safe, and I think that's going to be the way it is. I'm going to add you to the list, Christine. I've got Justin and then Christine.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of following from like Katarina and Kyle's points that like fires and like climate change, it just kind of falls into like the like wide range of just things that we're hearing every day, like war, like world hunger, whatever. And since we're like so far removed from it, like, or at least it's so far removed from like our direct experiences and lives, it's like not something we usually think about, and it's easy to forget. Especially with like places like you mentioned, like California or like Australia, which are like perpetually on fire.
Yeah.
Like even now, I'm like not really thinking about it that much, even though I have like family in LA who lives maybe like 20 or 30 minutes from where the actual fires are, but there have been so many fires that they've always been okay. I'm like, oh, like it's something to worry about. And so I think it's just like really easy to forget and like lose sight of it.
Places where it's normal, think it's normal, and places where it's abnormal, it's just like, oh, it's one more bad thing. There's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world right now. It's kind of like, which one do I choose to worry about, or do I just like, you know, Netflix and chill? I just can't handle it. It's so hard. Okay, over to you.
It's not too much. I did want to share like an anecdote,
Please.
which for me was, I think was quite the experience for me to having come to Vancouver, and like now that I study climate change, study climate science,
I don't usually meet people on a daily basis who are like they deny climate change. But
You don't or you do?
I don't. I think in general I feel like
Come talk to my family sometime.
I
I'm
think-
glad to hear that.
I think with my family, obviously in Bangladesh, like we feel the effects. We are seeing heat waves. We are seeing floods. It's very real. So it's easier. I think I've had an easier time explaining to my family why my degree is important, which I know is surprising for most people. But I think for me, an experience that shaped how I now try to study climate science was when I was going to the US, which happened a few months ago actually. And this was in the Vancouver airport, and I was crossing, and I was in line way to the US customs agent, and I get called up.
I'm worried about where this is going.
And I'm usually prepared for a lot of very, very personal, very like direct questions. Being Muslim, coming from a Muslim majority country, I always get asked like 10 more questions than the average other person. It always happens. So I'm ready for any question of like, how many family do you live in America? Give me the driver's license. Like I have all my family information, everything. I have a whole binder. I have my travel binder that I take with me every time I travel. This I wasn't prepared for, obviously, because then I get asked, what am I doing in Canada? I say I'm a student. I'm here on the study permit. I go to UBC. What do you study? And I said, I study climate justice. I study environmental politics. And then he goes, what's that? And I say, I study the politics around and how climate change is, like how we can use politics to help us understand climate change, help us fight the climate crisis. I study sort of the policy side of it, and bits and pieces of like the science, obviously you need to know that. And he's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. Climate change, it's real, it's happening, and I'm interested in it. He said, but you know it's a hoax, right? I'm like, what? I was like, what is a hoax? And he's like, climate change. It's a common hoax. I was like, what?
It's a little beyond the
Yeah.
job description here. Going off script.
And then I was silent, and he's like, oh, don't worry, this is not for like you're free to go. I'm just curious. I'm like, okay, what about it is a hoax? He's like, well, the government's making it all up to make us pay more money. And I'm like, how? Like, what are you paying more for? And he's like, I don't know. They just always come up with all these things. Like suddenly, like climate change is suddenly happening. Like in the last 5 years, like what do they mean? Like, what do you study? Like, how is that something that you can study at university for? And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. What do you want me to explain? Like, you're in BC. Like, you have heat waves happening. Like the heat wave just happened. You have wildfires happening every summer in high frequency. Like, is the connection slightly debatable? Yes, but it's not unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I can give you like a million examples. What do you want? I don't have research papers on hand to show you. And so he was like, well, yeah, no, I don't know. The summers were a bit hot in 2021, but it's fine now.
I'm alive.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, people died, and it was very unusual, but it's not going to be very unusual in more years to come. You'll see more of that. You'll see it will get worse. And he said, well, how do you know that? I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to debate this with you right now, so I need to catch my flight. And then he let me go. Which obviously was an experience, but I think it's just the idea that like how, despite how things are getting worse, right before our eyes, obviously we've seen like hurricanes happening in higher intensity, wildfires getting worse, like these things aren't unrelated, and like we know why it's happening. We have pages, thousands and thousands of pages of literature telling us why it's happening, yet it's very difficult to get people to see that. And I think as I'm studying this more, I've only been studying this for like 3 years, but obviously I've been interested for years now. I only see now how, like, despite learning so much more, I see why it's so much more, I don't understand why it's so much difficult to like get people to actually see what the issue is, what the core of the issue is.
There is, this speaks to a fundamental difference between fire and climate change. I'm coming back to you, Christine, don't you worry. And that's, you can see a fire and people don't question the science of fires. The wind is blowing, it's hotter, the ground is drier. People are like, okay, yeah, that sounds right. We're hearing, they're talking to scientists about these fires. Climate change is a different story, and the question of whether climate change is contributing to those fires is a different story. So, there has been an industry, a lot of investment, effort by think tanks, by the oil industry in calling into question scientific consensus on climate change. Scientific consensus is very strong. And as a result, there's virtual unanimity among scientists on the impact of humankind in causing climate change. But there's a significant fraction of people, especially in North America and more so in the US and in Canada, who don't believe it because they've been told by the sources that they trust that this is not caused by humans. And so it's a 25% higher fraction in the US than Canada, but even in Canada, a majority of conservative voters do not accept that climate change is even partly caused by human activity. So this is, that's a very important difference between the nature of the threats. In fact, scientists, what's emerged, because many of these things, floods, wildfires, heat waves, hurricanes, these are natural phenomena. What scientists have now is something it's called attribution science. So they look statistically at what is the likelihood that we would see this particular event or this scale based on in the absence of climate change. And the numbers are like some of these extreme outliers, like the heat dome, were virtually impossible. Like extremely unlikely that they would happen in the absence of climate change. Is this a two-finger one?
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to Christine first, then we're coming back to you. Ben.
I feel like to everyone else that just spoke, I feel like a big part of why we also don't feel it or don't care as much, because I feel like we're so privileged here. I feel like we're technically the 1% of the world, everyone in Canada, everyone in America, so we can get away from it way easier than developing countries to begin with. Places like Indonesia or all like the Latin American countries that experienced a harder wildfire season. It's harder. They don't really have insurance the same way we do. They have all their livelihood in one place, whereas us, I feel like we can get away and are able to get stuff back, or we still have a job, or it's easier to continue your life even with these natural disasters coming our way. Especially like in Vancouver, growing up, I feel like climate change never affected or never really was taught to us as much, just because it's like, we know the big one is like coming, but that's not like climate change is kind of a given is gonna come. And then the heat and the less snow is something I feel like Vancouverites are okay with, because it's not gonna affect us as much as
I'll go to
other
Whistler
places.
instead of Grouse.
Yeah. Like, or like, oh, I can't go to Seymour this year, I'll just go to Whistler, rub a stone or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, there is the acceptance of climate science and the level of concern about climate change is much higher in parts of the world that are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And Canada's seeing twice the rate of warming, but we are more protected by our resources, by our wealth. But turns out not so protected. All those people who died 600 and some people in Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, died in 2021. They didn't have air conditioning because historically the weather's been pretty moderate. Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about how we kind of tend to not worry about it if it's not directly impacting us or think about it as much. Last year, in the first semester, I went on exchange. I was in San Diego, and in August, Hurricane Hillary, which was downgraded to a tropical storm, hit San Diego, and there was a lot of kind of fear about it because it's very uncharacteristic weather for the West Coast. And leading up to it, everyone was buying crazy provisions and tons of canned food and toilet paper, like kind of at the start of COVID. And I got like a couple things. I bought like a little light and some games that I could play if I lost power and some food and stuff. But then when it happened, it was kind of just like a regular like November day in Vancouver. Like it was just raining pretty hard and windy, and I'd only been down there for a week, so I kind of just treated it as life as usual. I was like outside, I went swimming.
You've got good rain
It
gear.
was still like 20 degrees out, so I was just enjoying being in California. But so it wasn't anything that out of the ordinary for me, because I was used to that kind of weather being here. But the first couple weeks of school, it was like all that we talked about, and it was sort of this massive event, and it was just kind of interesting to see how like weather that was normal here was so completely out of the ordinary that it constituted like a massive shift in sort of discussions. And
So it was a big enough event for them that it was still talked about as a serious
But
thing.
if
It
it
wasn't
was-
like, they gave us all these warnings and then it wasn't so bad.
But
so,
if it was
like,
here,
we're
it would have
gonna
just
ignore
been a sort of a regular rainstorm. Like there was not much power loss. A couple trees went down, but it was just very out of the ordinary for San Diego. So
Did I miss anyone? I'm gonna share some thoughts I've got on similarities and differences, most of which we've covered. There's, the scientists knew in both cases. There was reasons to expect that this fire could get bad. Like the conditions were, yeah, please.
Finish your thought.
No, I'll go, yes, go ahead.
Because I was gonna say something and I forgot it.
I thought, like, somebody's hand was
Yeah,
up. Who was it?
I was just gonna say that, like, what we're talking about, for a lot of people, it's really hard to, like, imagine your destruction or your death or just, like, something horrible happening to you. And, like, as a society, that's not really something that we think about, and it's not really normal for most societies.
You don't want to.
Yeah, you don't really want to. I think like, human cognition really just struggles with that as well. It's just not, like, in our nature. But then the reason why we see, for example, more worry from the global south is because it's easier to imagine something when it's actually happening, when you're getting live,
You've
like,
seen it.
yeah, live details as you go through your life. And that's also why we see more climate action from the global south. A lot of stuff is coming in from like places like Puerto Rico or Kiribati and things like that. Because to them, like that, it's not like something to imagine anymore. It's like happening. And yeah, it's interesting to see that they're kind of leading the climate action when they don't necessarily have the resources or the power to do it.
They haven't contributed much in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Kiribati reducing its fossil fuel consumption has virtually no impact on global emissions. But these are low-lying atolls, is that how, coral, they're basically, they're going under.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're watching the water take over your country's land, it's hard to deny something's happening. Yeah.
For Kiribati, because I took the class with Simon, and he's done all of this
Simon's the
research.
Kiribati guy at
Yeah,
BBC,
he's done
and
all this
actually,
stuff.
kind of the climate globally.
He's done all of his research there, so he would always, I think every single class he would share something about Kiribati and like the research he did there. So it's really interesting to see, because obviously it's one of the very, very vulnerable countries in the world for like climate change, but also very resilient. Like the communities there have learned to live with the reality of like what they're facing and come up with very, very creative solutions of like how to deal with any issues that they face with them losing their atolls and like losing like usable land. So it's very interesting.
Although some of these countries are starting to plan on their demise, like where will the people go? Can they retain their language? How will they as a nation survive when their land is gone? So there's limits to how much they can adapt as this keeps getting worse. So yeah, similarities in that there's strong science, there's a strong scientific understanding of what's going on with both the fires and climate change. But even then, it's not just the regular folks. There was an institutional. There was it was the actual firefighters were in denial. This will be fine. This isn't going to be the one. They weren't learning their lesson that Adam mentioned, that every day something that's never happened before happened. you know, life-threatening, urgent, both cases, one case more immediate, like urgent today, this could, you know, take my house or kill people in my family. But, and so more personal, but the risks to lives and livelihoods and property are urgent in both cases. This sort of return to normal was striking to me. You know, Fort Mac rebuilt, and you know, town burned down, and it's still vulnerable, even more vulnerable with every year to a recurrence of that kind of fire. But people went back and built their homes because that's where their jobs are, that's where the oil production is, that's where they own property, that's where their insurance will pay them to do it. Like there's a sort of what's the word? Like if you're rolling on your bike and you keep going, you stop cycling, you keep going.
Cruising?
Pardon?
Cruising?
Inertia?
Inertia, thank you. This is what happens in your 60s. Names and occasionally a word just won't come to you. There's an inertia to our lives that, you know, there's this change that's coming, it's already happening, and yet this is how I work, this is where I live, this is, you know, where my roots are. Some big differences. The experts underestimated the severity of the fire in Fort McMurray. They've been pretty spot on so far in climate change. The last year or two has been worse than predicted. But otherwise, the models are very good at predicting what's going on. Everyone in Fort McMurray lived. That's not the case with climate disasters. People are dying in other places in wildfires, in floods. Pakistan, massive flooding. I think 1,700 people died there in those storms, and more will. 619 in British Columbia. Fire is easier to see as something natural. It's kind of easier to believe the science because it's natural, and it's harder, I think, to accept climate science, especially, well, it's not what we're familiar with, but also to the extent we're to blame. I think people are really resistant to believing that, not of their own fault, but simply because of their actions in moving around in an internal combustion vehicles, and heating their homes in gas. In Canada, big industry, you know, you hear a lot about big oil. Industrial sources account for about 45% of the emissions, so the rest is small sources. It's buildings, it's motor vehicles, it's landfills, it's schools and universities and stores and, you know, individual sources that are burning those fossil fuels. Climate change is global, and that fire was local. It was exacerbated by a global phenomenon, to be sure, but the scale of coordination that was needed was very different. They were able, it took too long to get word out in Fort McMurray, this fire is coming, you have to evacuate, but it was a small enough place and tight-knit enough that people, you know, contacted each other. And, their text messages took off when somebody heard about the evacuation, and they got everybody out of that town. You can't get everyone off the planet, for starters, but the level of cooperation needed across countries, even across provinces in this country, between cities, between individuals, is much harder in the case of climate change. I'm going to close with one thing, and there's one of the vignettes that stayed with me, is there was this kind of normalcy to denial, but there was also a kind of normalcy to the community response to the fire. And I don't know if not very many of you have read it. There's this moment as this one family, the family where the wife is screaming, "The fire's on our street," and they're driving, and there's a traffic jam. There's only one road out of each of these neighborhoods, and only one road out of Fort McMurray, well, in one direction. The other direction was blocked by the fire, and so there's a traffic jam, and the one guy's truck, the temperature got to like
60, I think.
60, 65 Celsius, like the not inside, because it was a little
Outside.
colder outside, the temperature monitor on the truck. They've got, you know, burning stuff is falling, they're surrounded by fire, and people stayed orderly. There's a moment where there was space on the side, and the guy's wife could see that he's looking at, I can get my family out of this if I go around everyone else by going off the road. I got a big truck, I can get out of here. And she says, don't be that guy. And no one was that guy. They all evacuated in an orderly way, and luckily, they all got out. But there's a level of collective action embedded in that, a sense of social norms, that if we all behave and follow the rules, we can get out of here alive. That worked in that case, and that I wonder how we harness that willingness to, how do we create social norms about acting together on climate change? Because there was something it speaks to how powerful that norm was, that this guy who's worried that his family, he's got kids in the backseat crying, the animal, the pet's whimpering. There's a very real risk that his family's gonna die, and he's the one holding the steering wheel, and yet everyone was orderly and took their turn getting out of town. So this is the glimmer of hope. And then they'll move back and rebuild Canada's oil industry, because that is the economy that we built, not because they made personal bad choices. Alrighty, anyone want any other last words? Yeah, I don't know.
I wonder what the perspective of everybody who lived that evacuation is on climate change now. Because my perspective on the oil industry has changed, living somewhere where livelihoods depend on it, where I always granted that, okay, yeah, this is important even though it's bad for the environment. Now I go, oh shoot, this is all some people have, while still taking it very strongly that, okay, we need to change for the good of the planet and humanity. I wonder if the flip side happens where you go, oh, okay, I've grown my whole life out of the oil industry and I heart oil and gas, but maybe fires and floods and all this, there might be something to that. I really want to know, and I really wanted to know. I kind of sneak in little questions at the bar in Fort Nelson, but like,
But
I didn't really carefully, because it seems, you don't want to be that.
It's rude. It's
It's so
perceived
rude.
still in our
It's so-
society as rude. Like I'm the person in the friend groups who tries to say, do we all really need to fly to go on our vacations? Let's, and it's like farting in the room.
Yes.
So does it work? What do you find out in the bar?
Oh, not that. I wasn't brave enough to ask any direct questions, but I'd like to ask some more direct questions. Yeah, no, it was more just me asking about what it was like to be evacuated, because I was actually in Seoul, I think, but yeah, no, nothing yet, inconclusive.
Okay, and that would be hard research to do on the ground. There
I'm gonna
are
do it, though.
there are some people I know who are doing, there's a guy doing his Al, whose dissertation is on this topic, but I haven't seen very convincing results from that yet. But certainly there are a lot of people working in the oil and gas industry who believe climate change is real and wish, would like to have other economic opportunities. There are a lot of people from British Columbia who fly and spend long periods of time away from their families because that's, as your dad did, because it's a way to support their families that would love to have an alternative to that.
I've got a friend who tells me her dad growing up worked in the oil fields and donated a big chunk of his paycheck to Greenpeace every time. Which, which is that just ironic or painful or poetic or something, but
Yeah, no, I think it really, it speaks to these are systems, and we're not going to solve this by looking to individuals to choose not to take jobs. We're going to need a more systemic change, but that'd be like, my heart breaks for that guy.
Yeah.
Like, that would be really hard. Alrighty, we'll see you all next week. We're going to talk about beaver pelts and lumber exports and read some economic history. And I will post the discussion questions today. There will be a reflection assignment, and there will also be discussion questions. I haven't posted yet. Well, I will post the question. I think there's one. Oh yeah, don't take your name cards. Never take your name cards. Where's my lesson? Bring up to me. Here's your file. I think